Welcome back to Rock Your Retirement. Today I have a special treat for you. Miriam Goodman, who wrote the book Too Much Togetherness, Surviving Retirement as a Couple, has agreed to come on the show and talk about a very important subject, and that is how your relationship can survive your retirement. So, if you are married or in a relationship, you can't afford to miss today's episode of Rock Your Retirement.
Talking with people about how to have a great retirement. This is the Rock Your Retirement Show. We don't talk about money, but we talk about almost everything else you need to rock your retirement. Now, here's your host, Kathy Klein.
Today's guest is Miriam Goodman. She's a columnist on Examiner.com and a former radio and television producer. Her interviews with hundreds of retirees and younger boomers have provided her with their insight on how the next generation will change retirement. Her books on retirement deal with the issues that no one's talking about, and it deals with how retirement affects us emotionally. Her research into how relationships are altered by retirement are in her book on how the boomer generation can deal with these changes. Marriages, friendship, and self-esteem are all affected by retirement. I've asked her to come on the show today because I've seen marriages break apart after retirement, and I'd like her to share her insights on how to prevent that. As you know, retirement's not just about money. It's about all the other things that your financial advisor never told you about, and Miriam can help us stay together after we retire. Miriam, among all the other things that you've done, you wrote a book titled Too Much Togetherness, Surviving Retirement as a Couple. What prompted you to write that book?
Well, it's all the things that you just said, Kathy. We are not really prepared for being together with our spouse 24 hours a day. We each have had parallel lives. We've worked, we've taken care of children, we've taken care of aging parents, we've been in the community, all those things, and all of a sudden we're thrown together 24 hours a day, and we don't know how to behave. And the biggest secret that I discovered is that neither the wife nor the husband will ever say to the other, I really don't want to be with you 24 hours a day. That's a horrible thing to say. So we have to sort of tiptoe around these issues, make it seem like it's the other person's choice as much as ours, and see how we can keep this marriage together, keep the couple together, and keep our lives on an even plane so that we can go forward into retirement happy.
So you wrote the book, and you wrote this book because I'm looking at the back cover, and it says that you've done dozens of interviews, situations. So, did you retire? Did you think of this on your own, or?
I didn't retire, but I saw what was happening with people I knew, that the husbands were retiring and the wives weren't ready yet. Often in today's society, women take time out from their careers to stay home with their children. So when they go back and they're getting into their 60s, they're just getting to the point where they have the power and the prestige and the money and the feeling that they're important at work. And just around that time is when the husbands may be completely burned out. They've been at it steadily for 40 or more years, and they're ready to stop. So it first occurred to me what's happening when the men are retiring and the women are still working. And I started asking people, and I said, oh, God, my husband calls me 20 times a day. It's as if he doesn't even know where we keep the ice. And they were going crazy. And actually, I asked my own parents. My father retired, and my mother being of that generation, my parents would be 100 years old today, my mother thought she had to retire as well. And my mother was a newspaper editor, and their social life and their community and everything was kind of tied up in the fact that my mother was out there as a newspaper editor all the time. And once she stopped working and my father stopped working, they were kind of thrown. There wasn't a problem with the marriage, but it was like, what do we do now? And they kind of lost the contacts they had in the community because, as you know, when you're on the top of your game, everybody's calling you because they want favors. When you're no longer doing it, the phone doesn't ring. It's pretty crazy. I know this happened to me. I used to work for a television station, and once I stopped working in TV, nobody called me anymore. When I was in TV, it was all, oh, my nephew's looking for a job, my cousin's looking for a job, can you get me on this show, can you do this? And it's really crazy. So when you stop working, when either of you or both of you stop working, it's a sort of an upset of the apple cart of your social life, as well as everything else. So I noticed this with my parents. I noticed this with people that I was talking to all the time about what happened if the husband retired first. And I thought, there's a book here, and there's something that nobody's talking about, because boomers are doing this their own way. That's the whole issue. We've done everything our own way, from our marriages, from raising children, from our careers, everything. We had to create it. And all of a sudden, here's retirement, and we don't want to do it the way our parents did.
I can completely understand. My husband is retired and I'm not.
Okay.
So I'm one of those. I'm still working. I still enjoy working. And my husband is, we call him semi-retired, but there's a big age gap between the two of us. The difference is that we share a workspace, and even though he's quote unquote retired, he still works because he sits on the board of a couple of different companies. So we'll be in the same room together 24 hours a day, but we're not talking necessarily. We might email each other because we're both on the computer. Isn't that funny?
Well, that's not so unusual. But what's the problem is if you each respect the other's work. I've had so many women tell me, for some reason I talked to several women who were therapists and who used their home as their office. And they would say the husband would not really respect the fact that they were in the other room with a client. Not that they would come barging in, but as soon as one patient left and the next one came, he'd come in, oh, you want to have some coffee? Or, oh, look what I read in the paper today, or whatever it was. That they didn't respect that space. And I'm not saying that all men do this. I'm sure women are just as guilty. But the whole problem is you're sitting in the same room, you're working. He may have just seen a joke on the computer that he wants to share with you, and you're in the middle of doing something. It's a real sticky situation. I mean, maybe one of you better go in the bedroom with a computer. I don't know.
I know. I completely understand, because I'll find my husband will tell me, oh, I said such and such to you. But I'm so focused on my work, I might tune out what he said. And so he tells me that he's told me something, and I have no recollection at all that he's said whatever it is.
When I first began this book, when I first began thinking about it, I was having my hair cut. And my hairdresser said, what are you doing? What are you working on? And I said, well, I'm thinking of writing a book about couples in retirement. And he said, oh, my God, the woman that was just sitting in this chair 5 minutes ago is retired, and her husband's retired. And she said to me, I really love my husband, but when I'm driving down the street and I see his car in the driveway, sometimes I want to just keep going. And, to the hairdresser who was young, he didn't get it, but he did get it, because otherwise he wouldn't have told it to me. But he didn't quite get the concept. And you and I understand what this is, and hopefully your listeners do too. It's not that there's anything wrong with your relationship. It's that you need your own space and you need your own time. And the biggest problem is that there's too many assumptions. He assumes that she wants to do this. She assumes that he wants to do that. And they never really sit down and talk about it.
So does your book tell people how to get out of that? Or what's your advice? Yeah, how do you get out?
You do. I do have a lot of advice in there. I know when I was pitching the book in the beginning, publishers kept saying, well, give us a list of things like that. And I said, it isn't a list that you sit down, there's 10 things. It's, first of all, you have to say, what was your communication style during the earlier part of your marriage? How did you make your interests and your desires known? Do that. Then you each know each other's soft points, vulnerabilities, things like that, and what works. For example, the women who were still working and coming home and finding their husbands asleep on the couch at 5 o'clock in the afternoon were the ones who were going crazy. The usual idea is, tell them to volunteer, tell them to take a class, tell them to join some group at the library, whatever it is. And each woman said, well, in my case, I can't tell him what to do. He would say no. But if I talk to another guy, friend of his, maybe a husband of a friend of mine, and he wants to do it, maybe he'll call up my husband and say, oh, let's take this class together. Or another person might say, he would never do it if anybody suggested it. But if I get the catalog from the local college and just leave it on the coffee table or in the bathroom, maybe he'll pick it up and think it's his idea. So you have to really say what works in your relationship. And if you've been married long enough to retire, you should know what works and what doesn't work. That's the first thing.
Did you find a lot of your friends were able to get their husbands out and doing things?
I found that if someone else suggested it, for example, one woman I interviewed was still working. Her husband had kind of retired in a fit. He had really quit, but he called it retirement. They had an apartment downstairs, and their divorced daughter and her son lived in the apartment downstairs. So this woman would come home from work, and she'd see her husband laying around, and one day her daughter said to her, "Do you know Dad watches Jerry Springer and things like that every afternoon on TV?" I mean, this guy was an educated engineer, you know. She says, "I just don't know what to do." And so, you know, the woman said, "I've known your father for 40 years. He's got to come to this realization himself. Nothing I say is going to make a difference." Well, lo and behold, the 10-year-old grandson comes up to his grandfather the next day and says, "Grandpa, will you teach me to play tennis?" So, okay, you can't turn down your grandchild, right? So he gets up, he starts practicing tennis himself to get himself ready, and he starts teaching his grandson tennis. And the grandson says, "Well, I have a friend who wants to learn too." And he starts doing it. Next thing she knows, her husband tells her, "I've just joined the church." She says, "What? You know, we've been married for years. You've never gone to church once in your life." He says, "I know, but this particular church has an actors group, and they put on plays." So next thing she knows, he's the star of every play, and now she's retired as well, and she's in the plays too. But, you know, it takes one little kick to get some people going, and you never know what it's going to be.
Well, when I hear complaints, it's usually the woman complaining about the man. When it's usually the woman saying, "He's underfoot. I'm not used to this. I want to get him out of the house." And I like the fact that it was the grandchild. Have any of your readers ever used that trick? They maybe put a bug in the grandchild's ear. "Hey, go ask your grandfather to teach you how to play football," or whatever.
Right, yes. I haven't heard it, you know, maybe after they've read my book they have. I haven't actually heard that being used. But one guy, this was just so crazy. His wife was still working, and she told me, "The biggest pleasure I've ever had going to work is sitting alone on the bus. I don't hear the kids. I don't hear my husband. I get to read. It's a nice, relaxing time. That's really special to me." Well, her husband retired, and he insisted on driving her to work and picking her up every day. And those 2 hours that she used to have to herself, you know, she said, was absolutely gone. She said things were so crazy. She'd wake up in the morning, and he would have gotten out of bed before she did. She'd go into the kitchen, and not only was the orange juice and the coffee waiting for her, but her vitamins were laid out in front of it. And she said once she went in the bathroom, and the toothpaste was always already on her toothbrush. So to me, I mean, this was the craziest thing I ever heard, but I'm interviewing people, so I don't judge, you know. I said, And then the worst thing happened. He didn't like being home when the cleaning lady came. So he insisted that they fire the cleaning lady. And I did say, "Well, does that mean he's cleaning the toilet and washing the floors?" She said, no, I have to do it. But he just was so uncomfortable having her there when he was there, as if he didn't have it in his own brain that he could go take a walk or go meet a friend for coffee or whatever it was.
Or maybe he could do the cleaning.
Maybe so, yes. So everyone has a story, Kathy. It's really true that there's no one solution for everyone, but, you know, there's a lot of things that can work, and the first is communication, and I guess the second is respecting the other person's busyness, whatever it was. You know, there's a guy who said to me, "You know, I may be busy, she may be busy, but my busy is always more important." Yeah, you know, and it, even if it's such a thing as like you're out and he's out, and you call your husband and say, "Could you pick up the milk?" And he'll say, "Well, you know, I'm playing tennis with the guys. What are you doing?" She says, "Well, I'm having coffee with my friend, and I'm just not going to have time." He said, "Well, you know, my tennis is more important than your coffee." Or, you know, that's just an example. Whatever it is, people have to respect it. Whatever you're choosing to do in your retirement is important to you, and the other person cannot denigrate it.
Right. How do you bring up that conversation? I'm I'm 50, so I don't technically qualify as a baby boomer, and I don't technically qualify as a Gen Xer. I was born in 1965, which puts me in nowhere land.
Well, we'll take the baby boomer if you want.
Thank you. I'm an unofficial baby boomer, but I relate more to baby boomers, I think, than I do Gen Xers. But how do you say that? I mean, people of my generation would probably say, "Hey, I need some space." But the older baby boomers, the ones that are in their 60s, I don't see them saying that. How do you broach that?
Oh,
how do you bring it up?
First of all, you have to, you said that women are doing better than men, and it's true. The women are complaining, but the women have been multitasking all their life. We've taken care of the kids, we've taken care of the family, we've taken care of the social life, we've been working, we've been in the community, volunteering, whatever it is. The men have been at work, that's it. So when they give up their work, they give up basically everything that they had in their lives. So the women have to go out of their way to reassure their husbands that they still respect them, that they still love them, that everything about them is just as important as it was before when he was bringing in a paycheck every time. So that's the first thing. And she also has to give him time. You can't just wake up on Monday morning retired and think that everything's going to be fine. You have to get used to it. I always say that what your job gave you, and I think you mentioned this a little bit in your introduction, your job gives you structure, it gives you a company, people that you work with, a community, and it gives you purpose. So when you stop working, often people have lost all those things, especially for men. Many of their friends were at work. That was their community. That's why we hear about people all the time that go back after they retire and want to have lunch once a month or something with the old guys because they've lost that community. And the structure of getting up and having a place to go every day is really important. And the same thing with the purpose. No matter what you're doing, it has a purpose. However menial you may think your job is, it has a purpose, and that's why you're doing it. So the next thing would be to try to replace those things in your life, whether the structure means, okay, I'm going to volunteer 3 days a week, or I'm going to meet my friend for a walk 2 afternoons a week, whatever it is. I always encourage people to take one of those great big planning calendars and write down what they're going to do for the week. And both the husband and the wife need to do this. And then you can look and see if you have things that are conflicting, and you can say, okay, well, I'm not going to be home at all on Thursday. Maybe we should plan to go out to dinner when we both get home. Or so-and-so, you're going to be here on Monday. Maybe you can let the repairman who's going to fix the washer come in, whatever it is. You work out your calendar, and you find out that, yes, you both have things to do, and here's some time when you can be together. And you see an empty day or an empty afternoon or an empty evening, and it's like date night. You can say, okay, we're going to be together. But the thing is, you have to work on it together, again, in the way that works best for all of you.
Don't you think it really falls on the wife to bring that conversation up? Because, the men tend to be fixers, right? They tend to be fixers. We're listeners. We tend to talk out, to our girlfriends. We'll talk, and the man will say, well, what can I do to fix your problem? Do you think that if the wife said, look, I love you, but I need you to find an activity. I need you to find something so that I can feel like I have my own space. Do you suggest that?
I do. I say avoid boredom. That's the way. I avoid boredom and avoid isolation, because those are the things that lead to depression. Again, you mentioned at the beginning it leads to depression. You said sometimes it affects the marriage. It also leads to alcoholism, I hate to tell you. I remember one woman telling me she'd get up and leave in the morning, and she'd see her husband sitting at the table having a coffee, and she'd come home in the afternoon, and he'd be on his second or third martini. Then he'd want to have a little wine with dinner, and then maybe after dinner he'd have another drink. And she was, she couldn't do this. She had to get up in the morning and go to work, and it was really driving her crazy, and she didn't know how to talk to him. She really did not know how to talk to him. And she thought maybe just getting a divorce was going to be a better thing, because she had never had the intimate relationship that she thought that she should have had to talk to him. But finally, she did it bit by bit. So, for example, she said, you're home all day. I'm at work. She was really at work because she needed the health insurance. She wasn't 65 yet.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And she says, we've got to work this out. She says, you've got to help. You've got to make dinner. So every day he would call her at 4 o'clock and say, what do you want for dinner? And then he would go out and buy it. And then little by little, he would start trying to cook, even though he said he didn't know how to cook. So more and more she got him involved, got him doing things. And, one of the things I did discover, and this was kind of shocking to me, that my generation of boomers, everyone I knew, the husbands were so involved with the child care and so involved with everything with the kids, whether it was picking them up at school, taking them to school, going to parent conferences, cooking, cleaning, all these things. And I discovered that once they retired, they became their fathers. They sat there as if they didn't have to do this anymore. This was not their, even if their wives were still working. It was the most shocking thing I had ever seen. I said, well, I'm retired now. I don't have to do it. And, women have to broach that subject in any way that works for them. But it's what happens is when they get bored and depressed and drink and don't know what to do, it's a terrible, terrible feeling. I write a column. In addition to my books, I write a column on Examiner.com, and once I suggested to people, maybe the first thing you should do when you retire is take that trip you've always talked about. And a woman wrote to me at the end of my column. She said, it's a terrible idea. All of a sudden you're telling us to spend 24 hours a day together. We can't do that. We have to ease into it. We're going to take our trip in a year. So you never know what works for people.
I never thought about it that way. I never thought about taking a trip as being 24/7, but I guess you're right. I guess cruises, you could get away from each other. One could go do something while the other went to the pool, but that does make a lot of sense. I never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, I had to teach my husband that shopping was part of the travel experience.
What is your column called?
It's called, I'm called the Retirement Living Examiner, San Francisco Retirement Living Examiner. If you go on Examiner.com and put in my name, that's the easiest way to do it because the URL changes with each title of my column. So I can't give one name, it's just, there's 200 columns on there if anybody wants to look at the archive. But I can't give you the URL to go to each time because it changes by the title of each individual column. It's a crazy setup.
Okay, well, we'll have a link to the Examiner, and we'll have a link to your books on the show notes. So that's really good. Now, you had mentioned that one of your interviewees, her husband started going to church. How can couples keep each other healthy, help keep each other healthy both spiritually and physically? Do you have any advice for that?
All I can say is nothing is forever. Try something. If it doesn't work, try something else. I know that there's a couple that lives up the hill from me. He's still working. She's at home. And every night about 6 o'clock, I see them go out for a walk. And maybe she's helping his health, mental health, helping him wind down from the end of the day, from working all day, something like that. Set a time when you're together, when you don't have any distractions. They happen to have a dog with them, but I hope that's not too much of a distraction. But, make this a time that they're together so you're helping each other. I think you're helping each other emotionally and physically by taking a walk together, if you can do that. The other people make dinner that time of day when they either work on it together and then sit down and have it together. So everything you can do together that helps you spiritually and physically is important. But if it doesn't work, you have to try something else.
But don't spend 24 hours together.
Some people want to. Some people say this is what we worked all these years for. Some people want to do that. I don't know any of those, but it's true, and I've seen it. I remember years ago going and taking a dance class, a ballroom dance class. And what was surprising to me is that the couples who came in together insisted on dancing together. They didn't want to try it out with a stranger. And I thought, isn't this part of the idea of taking a class? Is that you dance with other people, you meet other people, you see what their style is like, and you adjust. That's to see if you're learning. If you're always just with your partner, you think you know what you're doing. It's just like if you take a language class from one teacher, and then you go out and try to use that foreign language someplace. Well, how come he doesn't understand me? My teacher did. You know what I mean? So you have to keep doing these things out there in public. I think that's the most important thing. You can be together 24 hours a day, but even if you're on a trip, or you're on the cruise, you sit down and you talk to the other person at the table. You learn new things. Maybe you go off and play bridge one afternoon and he goes to watch the film. Whatever it is, you're still together, but you're giving yourself some space.
Great advice. Absolutely great advice. And I know what you're talking about the dance class, because my husband and I have tried to take dancing a couple of times, and it's usually where I live in San Diego. Whenever we've gone to a class, it's usually about 30 women and 3 men.
Okay.
And my husband says, I don't want to dance with all those other women. I just want to dance with you. And so because of that, we don't take dance classes anymore because of if it was 30 women and 20 men, I think he would be better with it. But just for all you men that are listening, if you're looking for an experience that will let you meet women, take a dance class. Right. You will meet a lot of women.
Good one, right. That's a good one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Miriam, do you have any advice for couples regarding sex?
I do have a little advice for women that men who are retired sometimes have a self-image problem. And their sexual activity sometimes reflects that they don't think of themselves as so macho, as so important anymore. And I learned this in interviewing with someone whose husband had been very active in politics. And during the 2008 or which election it was, he was being interviewed all the time on television, and he was considered an expert on certain things and being written about. He was feeling very good about himself, feeling very strong, and this was reflected in their relationship. And she said once the election was over and he wasn't the big cheese anymore and no one was calling him, she felt that letdown in his own self-image was reflected in their sexual relationship. So again, I hate to put the burden on the women, but you've got to, make him think he's just as important now as he was when he was on TV or whatever it was that he was doing, when he was president of the company, when he was principal of the high school, whatever it was. It's about the self-image, and the self-image is really reflected in your sexual relationship.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I think a lot of this really does fall on our shoulders. Men are strong physically, but women are probably stronger emotionally than men are. They're the fixers. And if we tell them that we need something fixed, they generally will comply if we can give them specific instructions. Not to say tell them what to do, but like you said, build them up. Give them something to do. Your interviewee who helped her husband learn how to cook, by first having him go shopping, do it in baby steps. That sounds like that's your advice, is to do everything in baby steps and not just throw in the towel.
I just had thought of something when you said don't tell them what to do. I had a friend who was still working, and her husband had retired. He was quite a bit older as well. And he had been a doctor in research, so he spent most of his time in the lab and wasn't out there treating patients. But he had what was considered an important job. And he came home, and he became terribly depressed. But he didn't admit it. And she would say to him, you really ought to see somebody. You seem to be depressed. He says, no, that's not true. And I saw it myself. I went to visit her once, and she's a photographer. And she sits at the computer rearranging the pictures and whatever. And he sat in the room basically staring at her back while she was doing all this. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching television. He wasn't doing it. He was just sitting there watching her rearrange the photographs. And I was shocked because, I had known him as this important person as well. So she finally got him to agree that he would go see a therapist. And she insisted on going with him. I said, what do you mean? How can you do that? She said, I'm sure when he got there, he'd tell the therapist, there's nothing wrong, and my wife's just driving me crazy. She wants me to go, but really, I'm fine. And she said, I want to be there the first session and tell the therapist, look, this is how he's behaving. He's sleeping all the time. He's falling asleep here. He won't get up and do anything. He doesn't have any initiative. I asked him to pack for a weekend trip. I come home. All he's done is open the suitcase. She gave all these examples and then left. And then the guy had a very successful treatment, and everything's fine, But she said, I can't trust him to tell the truth. People lie to therapists just like they lie to anybody else. I thought that was brilliant.
So go to the first session.
Yeah, well, even if it's a medical doctor, a physical doctor, and the guy's been complaining about sluggishness or whatever, or she sees that he's sleeping more, whatever it is, these macho guys are not going to admit it, and they're certainly not going to tell the doctor. I just wanted to say one other thing about couples and doing things together and not together 24 hours a day. I think you need that schedule, the calendar I talked about, but be sure you leave some blank time. Even if it's not time that you're going to spend together. Just time for somebody to call you up and say, oh, let's go bungee jumping. You know, you can't say, oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy, I'm playing bridge that afternoon. Leave some time to do whatever it is you want to do, either together or separately.
Or to do nothing.
Or to do nothing, absolutely.
Right, absolutely. That's great advice. Absolutely great advice. But you have talked to a lot of people who were either they've seen their husbands retired or they've retired. You've done a lot of interviews with people. So what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody before they actually retire?
Have a plan. You have to have a plan. You cannot retire on Friday and wake up on Monday saying, oh, gee, now I can clean out the garage. Cleaning out the garage is not a plan. If you wanted that garage cleaned, you could have done it while you were still working. Have a plan of what you're going to do, whether it's reading to kids in the school in your neighborhood or working at the food bank or taking a trip or spending more time with your grandchildren or getting out that easel or the typewriter, the computer to write the novel, whatever it is, know what you're going to do. Give yourself a plan. You know, people say, oh, no, it doesn't matter. Don't worry. I'm going to take long walks and I'm going to do this. Well, that's fine, but you have to be ready for 12 months a year weather. You can't take long walks in the middle of the winter if you live in the east or the north. You can't play golf 12 months a year, even if you live in California, because sometimes it rains. You have to have a plan of what it is that you want to do. And as I said earlier, nothing is in concrete. It can change. But have some ideas of what you want to do, especially the first few months, because otherwise it will lead to depression.
That is great advice. Thank you so much. Second question that I have is, what if you're already stuck? You know, what if you're already retired and you feel stuck? Do you have any advice for that person that you're sitting across the table with to get out of a rut? What kind of advice would you give to that person?
Depending on how deep the rut is, I might recommend therapy. Otherwise, I would think the best thing to do is to find a new activity they can do together. Okay, so they can't go dancing because he won't dance with other women, but maybe they should learn to play tennis, or maybe they should learn to play golf, or maybe there's some kind of a low-impact aerobics class that they might both want to try, or maybe they both like to read, but they've never been in a book group together. Maybe there's something where they can read a book together and discuss it themselves as well as with the group. Find an activity that will first get you out of the house. That's important, to get out of the house. And the next thing is to give yourself kind of a new image. I've found that people who retire kind of let themselves go a little bit physically, especially men. They stop getting haircuts quite as frequently as they did. Maybe they stop changing their clothes as often as they should. They kind of think, I don't need to do that anymore. I think that's a bad idea. You do need to do it. You give yourself a different feeling if you're in fresh, clean clothes and you've just had your hair cut or you've just put on makeup or whatever it is that makes you feel good. I think that's really important, that people think of themselves as still a vibrant part of the community and not just some old guy who nobody's paying attention to.
Great advice. Thank you so much. Now, I'm going to have a link to all of your books in the show notes, but if someone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
The easiest way is through an email that I call retirement27@AOL.com, or you can go to my website, which is toomuchtogetherness.com.
Okay, so retirement27@AOL.com or toomuchtogetherness.com.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks, Miriam, for coming on the show. You know, your work is so valuable. You could be saving a marriage today. So thank you.
So. Okay. Thanks
we
a lot.
really appreciate. Yeah, and for my listeners, we release interviews with retirees who are rocking their retirement, or authors like Miriam who can help you rock your retirement. So we release interviews with vendors who can help you with the sandwich generation issues, such as spouse who's aging, or a parent who's aging, or even grandchildren issues. If you'd like to get notified when we have some free stuff for you, you can go to rockyourretirement.com and sign up for our newsletter. So we'll see you next time on Rock Your Retirement.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Your Retirement Show. If you are rocking your retirement or know someone who would make a great guest on our show, please send us an email at podcast@rockyourretirement.com.
Are you buried in information regarding Medicare health insurance? Have you gotten a 4-inch stack of mail regarding Medicare? Do you wish that you could find an experienced agent who works with multiple companies to assist you or your loved one? You're in luck. Medicare Quick starts each prospective client with a 20-minute informational webinar that describes the difference between Medicare Advantage plans and Medicare Supplement insurance plans. Then, after you understand what type of plan matches your lifestyle, we help you decide which company suits your individual needs. Call 866-445-6683 for more information, or go to the website medicarequick.com. Mention the word ROCK and we'll send you a cool stylus pen just for calling. Medicare Quick is not connected with the federal Medicare program. Medical insurance licensed in the states of California, Florida, Nevada, and Texas, and Medicare Advantage and prescription drug plan service areas vary. California license number 0797566.